This may be a record. We seem to have completed our 5-minute break within 7 minutes, so I think you all deserve a round of applause for that. No, I'm really excited to be here with all of you today. Like Fabian said, we didn't actually expect this many people would be interested, and so it's going to be really nice to get to chat with more of you after the event. But before we do that, I'm also really excited to introduce our next speaker. And we decided that since this was the kickoff event, we wanted it to be extra special and sort of serve in a way to highlight how broad this field of audio development is. You know, you have embedded developers, you have people doing things in C++, working in DAWs, you have DSP, and then you have all of like the design, art side of things, and we're hoping that in this meetup we'll really be able to bring in speakers who can show a lot of these different aspects of the field, and so that way there will be something for everyone. So Astrid here is an artist, a designer, a researcher who has done everything from teaching rocket science to children, to locking herself inside a telephone booth for how long? 24 hours? Something along those lines.
That was difficult.
She's a co-founder of Bela.io. There are a few other, the list of things you've done is so long that that it could only fit in like a 12-chapter book. Yeah, you've done a lot of research work in academia and industry, and I think what speaks to this talk today is you specialize, you've written here, in making complex things useful, beautiful, and understandable. And I think that ties into today's topic quite well. So welcome, Astrid. I'll hand the mic over to you.
All right. I'll get the clock going so I get a good warning of when I've spoken too much. So, all right. Hello, everybody. My name's Astrid, and today I'm going to talk about something that is quite close to my heart that I ended up doing, I wouldn't say accidentally, let's say incidentally, which is documentation. And I'm going to make this topic exciting. So hold on to your hats. All right. I'm Astrid. I've done a lot of things. As Rachel has said, I did this job for 2 years. I was an explainer. That was the job title. This is the dorky shirt that I wore. It was at the Science Museum in London like 1 million years ago. And this was what we wore because we were supposed to explain science. And believe me, if you want to understand really how to explain something to somebody, get a 10-year-old to hammer you with questions. Makes you good at explaining. In the last now 8 years, I've been one of the co-founders of Bela, which is an embedded real-time Linux audio environment. And it's through this, I have directed design for Bela since the very beginning. And this has taught me a lot about a lot of things. And one of those things that I ended up doing accidentally in this role, because there's only 5 of us, is documentation. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. This is the sticker that's on my laptop. What is documented shall never die. And what this talk is about is how I think about documentation as an extension of design, a case study, the documentation that I wrote for a synth module called Gliss, and suggestions for designing documentation when it's definitely not your job. Now, this is really coming at, thinking about products. Who here has ever released something? Yeah, everyone's got a plugin or something. Come on, yeah, I see you. And that, as soon as you bump up against product design, it's a whole other different world, isn't it? It's just another bunch of skills and a bunch of things that nobody ever teaches you to think about. So anyway, part 1, documenting equals caring. I'll explain what I mean about that. Now, one thing I consider deeply as a designer and as somebody who's done this for a very long time is that design is a practice of care. And what that means is that doing good design means you're caring about a lot of things. How a person feels when they use something that you make. The stress of a steep learning curve, cognitive load of learning something new, what it feels like when you need information and you can't find it, how it feels to be an outsider in a field of knowledge, how someone who has an old version can learn to use it, that's a fun one, and what it feels like when you're expected to have knowledge you don't have, and what it feels like mentally to give up. And I think that this is really, when I boil down design, this is really what I'm caring about. And people say, well, that's just UX. And I will die on this hill. No, it's care. Because there is a difference between making an efficient workflow and making something that people understand how to use the first time they open it, a banking app or whatever. And then there is actually caring about the people who use your thing and thinking, what do they want? And I really do believe that design is a practice of care. So why do you care to care? Because it's a lot of effort and you can do it without doing it, and who cares? All right, because people respond positively to care and they feel affinity for things that care. And learning something new demands cognitive space, and I think that we underestimate what an enormous ask that is. And people remember these experiences. And I think that if we're really talking about why this matters to product design, people buy things that they like. People talk to each other, that's a big one. And the world is full of complex, badly explained things, and well-explained things stand out. And we are all in music technology, and we all know that the, let's say, engineering feature supremacy is becoming a smaller and smaller gate through which to pass. And so really you have things like what it feels like to use a product. That's the market differential. So here's a fun exercise. Don't do it right now, do it later. Find something that's similar to what you make or what you work on and learn to use it by reading the docs. Or even better, my personal favorite, find the API docs for a software or service that you've never used. Using the docs, learn to use it. And this is what you will find out. I say this all the time in Bela meetings, but that's not always true. I mean, I say it for effect, but it's not always true. Now, there are some amazing docs out there. Does anyone know what GStreamer is? Everyone ever use GStreamer? Yeah? Those docs make me want to weep. They're so well done. They're so good. I had to dig through GStreamer recently for an error, and it was implemented in some other thing, so I went back and found the GStreamer docs, and I was like, these are a thing of beauty. What an example of API docs. Amazing. The UK government, anyone ever used gov.uk? Yeah, it's really good. It's very well explained. It's amazing. So those two things are great. There's another example of something great. Does anyone know the MNT reform? Yes, it's a computer that has as open source as you can possibly get. The manual for this, the print manual, is also online, designed by 100 Rabbits. Anyone know those two people who live on a boat somewhere? This manual is incredible. So that is also takes my breath away, this manual. It's amazing. So there are good docs out there, but why are so many so bad? Because products are complex. Because people reading them understand things in different ways, and it's hard to reach everyone. That's a big thing. Because explaining things takes time and effort. Because understanding things takes time and effort. And because people don't bother, they don't think it's important, or they won't pay for it. That's the biggest one. So there's all kinds of terrible... What's going on here? There we go. So... how docs inform design. Now, this is a case study of a documentation project that I did. As I said, I'm one of the founders of Bela. We make this little thing and other things like it. We also make this family of touch sensors, capacitive touch sensors called Trill. And we also make this. This is called Gliss. It's a synth module. It's a touch controller for modular synth. This is what I'm going to talk about today. And we came out with Gliss in the spring of 2023. And this is the module here, and this was the brief. I have to explain everything it does, and it does a whole lot. It has to be light on detail, yet heavy on detail. The audience is not necessarily technical. If anyone does synth things, think about this one. And it has to explain, the docs have to always explain how it fits into a synth setup. So that was the task. And here's tip 0 that I have. You will be glad that you started the docs at the very beginning. Did I do this with Gliss? No, of course I didn't. I didn't know what I was doing. Now, I've written the docs for Bela for a very long time, but we haven't like had the product in the same way Gliss was. And so this was a completely different thing. I'm currently working on our next module. I did this. I did it, yes. Because I know how much that matters is when you start writing the docs at the very beginning of making a product. Because the docs and the design feed into each other. There are many times where I was given a lot of pause going, this is impossible to explain. Maybe that's a design problem. And the tip, so my first real tip, is what you name things matters, and name them early and intentionally. And a good example of this is Gliss. We had to name all this stuff. So there's 2 outputs. What do you call them? I mean, 1, 2, A, B. Well, we thought top output and bottom output. The top output is the most important. The bottom output is the second most important. Then there's 1 input. Then there is a button. This is the touch strip. And, well, that was good because after we put out this version originally, and everyone said, oh, I want the jacks at the thing at the top. So we said, all right, fine. And we packaged it with a second faceplate, and that became very popular. But look, see, if you name it intentionally, it does track, which was great because then we came out with a 1U version. And everything still applies, except these outputs. We named them 1 and 2, or like left and right, I don't know. That's jury's still out on that. But anyway, so naming things is really important to name them intentionally because when I say top output and bottom output, I'm trying to explain you have to be absolutely consistent if people are going to understand what the hell you're talking about. Because you might understand that product, but nobody cares as much as you do. And so being absolutely consistent with terms is, I would say, 50% of the battle. So then, you have to think about who's going to read this and how they're going to read. And there's all this, who are they? What the format? What's the context? What the purpose? No, you're going to. Oh, I have a tangent first. The terrible news is you're probably going to need more than 1 format. Why? Because of this demon sent from hell called YouTube. Everyone loves YouTube. You're probably going to need that. And there's so many formats. You can have YouTube, a website, a PDF, a fact page, how-tos, forum, Discord, print, whatever you want. But the better news is that multiple formats are easier with good core docs, and you get to worry about that not today. So that's the end of the tangent. But back to this. So we've got all of these different things that we need to think about, but I'm going to tell you right now, you really only need to think about this one, which is what do they know and what do they expect? The people that are reading, because people that use Gliss aren't necessarily going to be using a plugin or whatever. They're different groups of people. There's some crossover, but your product has like its core audience. What do they know and what do they expect? And that's not writing what you know and what you would expect, what the people that you want to sell to know and expect. It's what do your customers actually know and what do they actually expect? And that is really powerful. So how do you, and this is another interesting thing, is how do your current customers expect something to be explained and how do your not yet customers expect something to be explained? Again, sometimes not the same people. So the Gliss docs, what I ended up doing, I've got this manual. I'll put up a QR code later if you're interested. And the manual, it's a 60-page PDF manual that explains everything in beautiful Technicolor, a lot of pictures. And at the end, there's a cheat sheet. Because people are like, I don't want to read so much. I need to. Well, there's a cheat sheet at the end. You can print it out, fold it up. It's a little brochure, just great. We've also got the exact same docs as a video manual on YouTube. We also do this series called X Meets Gliss, which is synth artists doing things with Gliss, and then we interview them. There's also a KB page, knowledge base, and there's a Gliss upgrade site because we came out with version 2, and we had to figure out how to explain that. So, as you can see, there's a lot of, yes.
We had a question.
I'm sorry.
No worries, not at all. Thanks. With the sort of split between your potential users and readers, like, have you considered that there might also be people, like a potential sort of audience base that might have no idea what the hell that any of this is all about, and they need to have everything explained to them. So, I mean, you must have done the market research and know how your audience base is split. But I'm guessing that there's also a branch of those that you need to speak to in another language as well.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about modular synth is that there is, on the part of modular synth producers, an assumption that they understand DSP on the same level as people who make these things. And the truth is, some do, almost 100% don't really care in that context. And so I think and that is something that I deeply understand. And so I'm always writing for that person who doesn't know DSP.
Got it.
So that is, but it's true. Knowing who you're writing for is super, super important. But I'll get to that in a second. How are we doing here? All right. So this is what it ended up looking like. There's just one page from it. But this is the cheat sheet. And so you fold it up and makes a nice little pamphlet. And then you can print it out, keep it beside your synth. Woo! So you can see that like it's just a PDF or it's just like you can put a lot of things together in one printable PDF. Next tip, how you say things really does matter. The way you name things matter and how you say things. I love this quote. It's more fun to talk to someone who doesn't use long, difficult words, but rather short, easy words like, what about lunch? Does anyone know what philosopher said this? Plato? No, Winnie the Pooh. So when we started making Gliss, it's got these modes, and we were like, what are they called? Direct control, gesture record, signal processing, expressive keyboard. That's what they're originally called. Now this is a good moment where docs fed into design, because all of a sudden I started writing the docs, and I was like, these names suck. We have to simplify them. So direct control became control. Then that became record. Signal processing became signal, and expressive keyboard, notes. And so that absolutely simplified things, and that was only through writing the doc and going, these names are horrible, I can't even bother typing them. That's how we arrived at that. So this cycle of like docs flowing into design, into product design, and improving product design, I think is a really important pipeline. And if you only remember one thing, it's this. This is what I use all the time when writing these docs. I am not a documentation expert. I've now just done it for 8 years, but I think that this is a really powerful thing, which is tell them what and tell them why. And I'll give you an example. Slew rate, one of our new features. Slew rate allows you to customize how quickly a signal rises and falls when you start or release a touch. This feature means that you no longer need an ADSR module to create custom attack and release for your touches. You can set it right within Gliss. First part tells them what, second part tells them why. And this is something I do over and over in these docs, which is tell them what, tell them why. And separating just this trick. I mean, how many people in here, is anyone in here a documentation expert? Oh, so, are you?
Yeah.
Let's talk after this. I have so many questions for you. And this, I think, is really, really powerful, because often when we talk about our own products that we understand very deeply, we start to tell these two things at once. And just the act of separating them, consciously separating them, is really powerful. And now, does anyone remember this? What is it? Yes, pink trombone. I'm going to talk about voice. So the Bela voice is something that I've cultivated over many years, and it kind of flowed into this idea of the Gliss documentation. Of course, the Bela documentation, very different from the Gliss documentation, because the user base isn't really the same. But the Bela voice is consistent through all products, and that is 3 words: friendly, approachable, credible. So it's friendly in that people who've never done this stuff before aren't like, jargony, It's approachable in that you can enter at any point, it's understandable, and it's credible that engineering experts still believe that we know what we're talking about. So those are the 3 values of the Bela voice, and that's definitely present in Gliss. And I really would encourage you to really think about how you want to communicate to people, and what are the things that your customers are and I say customer, I don't say users. I hate the word user. User, what does that even mean? Whereas if you think of people as a person using something or a person buying something, all of a sudden, very different. So I would consider this very much the voice that you use and how you cultivate that. And there's some banned words. I'm letting you in some secrets here. These are things that I refuse to put in our docs. It's easy. And these are kind of soft bans. So if you find it in the KB, don't come at me. Actually, yes, email me and tell me. Use simply, simple, and you just, So these are my big bugbears of the Bela docs. They don't exist. Because I think that's, I don't know, if you're trying to be friendly, approachable, and credible, these aren't that. Because if you don't just know how to do something, then you feel dumb. And what was the last one? Oh, okay. This is something else very powerful that I've come to through writing this documentation. You're doing one of three things in documentation all the time. You are informing, you're educating, or you're inspiring. And it's really important to know which one you're doing. Informing is, this is how it works. Educating is, oh, my goodness, here's how to use it. And inspiring is, we're going to have to do this again? Yes. Here's why it matters. And these three things, and when I write API docs, I'm not doing this. But when I write a blog post, I'm not doing that. And when I'm writing most of the GLIS docs are here, this is how to use it. It's kind of API, product documentation, blog posts, and public communication. But I found this, again, I'm not an expert. Like everything with Bela, we've had to figure it out over 8 years. And so, but this is something I found very powerful as understanding how to communicate and how to write things that people respond to. So tip 5, docs will always expand, so get ready. And that's because there's always going to be a version 2. And why is version 2 so terrible? Well, it means you have to explain more features while still explaining the first features, explain the differentiation between versions, explain the pathways from one version to another, and explain how to upgrade. And this is always a thing to keep in mind with documentation is what am I going to do when the next thing comes out? Because you have to maintain it, but also put all this stuff on top. And we had to do it with GLIS. We released a firmware update about 10 months after we released the module. And that firmware update had a load of like really, really cool new features. So we had to explain what those were, as well as what everything else was, update the manual. It actually took quite a long time to get that right. And this is an interesting moment of documentation. This GIF is for the upgrade path. It's a website that upgrades the synth, the module through Web MIDI. And it's all broken into steps. And the second step says, plug in your module by USB. And I thought to myself, people don't know where the USB port is on this stupid thing. Nobody's ever taken it out of their rack. Nobody cares. And so I filmed myself just where the USB port is. And one of my colleagues said to me, do you think people are actually not going to be able to find the USB port? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, how often are people going to take it out of their rack? We've never told them to use the USB port before. I've gotten more emails from people saying, thank you so much for showing me where the USB port is. Because it seems like something that doesn't really matter, but it does. This is documentation. And I really like GIFs for documentation. You can show, not tell, which is always great. Tip 6, tools are out there. Now I've had to condense this talk down, but I will mention this once. There is something called Docusaurus. Has anyone ever seen Docusaurus? It's a documentation system. It's the least sucky one I've ever found. It's a React system that is maintained by Meta, or some developers who were formerly at Meta, I think. I don't know. But Docusaurus is a React kind of system for documentation, and it's really good. Really good. I'm currently redeveloping all of the Bela documentation in Docusaurus, and I've got to say, least sucky one I've ever found. So if this is something that you're doing or something that you're looking at or I've been thinking about doing, I'd have a look at Docusaurus. So now the last part, a documentation state of mind. And these are just like, if you're going to remember anything from this talk, these are some points. The first is take the docs seriously, because you're probably going to have to write them at some point. If you avoid them, it gets worse. Second is start early. Trust me, you'll thank me if you do. Third is let the documentation process inform design, because I found this really, really powerful, especially with GLIS. And now I do it for every single product that we make, which is start the documentation at the earliest possible time, because it tells you so many useful things about product design when you have to explain it. Be intentional with your terms, nomenclature, and voice. You can't leave any of that to chance. And finally, more docs are coming. You're going to have to write more. There's always more. You've never written enough. So that's just but because more docs are coming, you will have a version 2, you will have a partner product, you will have an update, you will have a whatever, an expansion module, whatever it is, then it's a lot easier to do when you have good docs to begin with. So anyway, that's me. If you want to have a look at the manual that I was talking about, you can download it there. Thanks.
Thank you for the talk. It was quite fun. I couldn't help but make a comment in the end. When you insist on writing docs in the beginning, I think there's a very strong parallel to test-driven development.
Yep. 100%, which also nobody likes to do. Well, people in this room might like to do it.
Actually, you need to do it with discretion, then it makes sense, not everywhere. Yeah.
I have actually a question very much along the similar lines. I mean, also my experience with test-driven development has always been very painful when I still haven't figured out actually what I'm doing. And you already, of course, are going into the direction saying, of course, the documentations are feeding into the product design. How much do you let it really completely take you in another direction with the product that you're actually creating?
I think when I started writing the GLIS docs, when I started writing the manual, because we realized we'd need a product manual like we'd never produced before, because it was for a different kind of audience than was buying Bela stuff. It was for people who really wanted to understand how things worked. And I looked around the synth space and I was like, all the documentation is terrible. So there's an opportunity here. And so I would say that the development of GLIS was like 80% done when I started writing the docs. And that last 20% was really, really, I think, quite strongly shaped by what the docs were doing. Because when you start to look at everything, you know, of course, with these complex products, writing is a linear format, and you have these complex products, and it's really hard to like sit down and think about things in a linear format. And I think that's a really good exercise, to be honest, is how do you explain it? And because once you make something, you have to explain it. And as I said, you know, it's a crowded market. There's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of like, how do you stand out as a plugin? Well, you're going to have to tell people how, like, what it's good for, how to use it, why they should love it. And so I think that this process of documentation, I really do value it. But I think for GLIS, the reason why it was so different was because it was a completely different kind of product that we'd ever made before. And I was like, oh, because the previous Bela documentation, there's tons of it. But it was more, that's more of an educating, like saying, or informing rather, with kind of educating, showing people how to use it. But it was on a completely different level. So I think that that's another reason why it struck me so much that the documentation was becoming a really important driver for these last stages of product development.
So on the topic of feeding back documentation, design, and possibly development, especially if you are like having a small team where everybody wears many hats, and you are doing a bit of everything, how do you switch to the mindset, you know, of a beginner? If you already like know the system in and out, how would you approach documenting it to avoid this cognitive bias of, you know, of this is obvious and this is maybe not so much? Mm-hmm.
I think that was really developing a style of language. Because everyone has to do that. Like, if you're going to write documentation, that's one of the big challenges is like, how do you explain this stuff and what kind of words should you use? And it was through the GLIS documentation that tell them what and tell them why, I really started to use that a lot to make things clear. Because it's not dumbing anything down. There's this kind of like myth that if you explain things really well, then somehow the magic is gone. It's such an excuse, and it's just not true, because well-explained things are beautiful things. And I've really started to like really believe that at my core. And through being the person writing the docs, as well as doing the interaction design and every pixel that Bela's ever produced, it does give me an enormous amount of satisfaction, because I think that it gives me the same sort of design buzz that making something good, like making something beautiful and useful does. It's the same sort of thing. It's the same sort of process. And so I think that it's just like any sort of process. Like, how do you look at a workflow and go, I'm approaching this for the first time. What should it look like? It's also adopting another mindset, isn't it? So I think it's just one of those lenses that you have to look through when you're doing design.
I actually have a question for you. You talked a bit about future-proofing your documentation. Do you have any suggestions for how to do that? Does it have to do with how you split up the information? Does it have to do with the language you use?
One way to future-proof your documentation is never, ever change your product. Done. It depends on what kind of documentation you're talking about. Of course, YouTube stuff, different story. I've got a lot of opinions on that. With the second version of the Gliss firmware, with all the new 1U format, all the new features, we released a second manual which built on the first manual. Docusaurus has this great feature which is docs versioning, where you can actually version the documentation. So if somebody has like something like V4, they can go and find the V4 docs. And so there's a bunch of ways to do it. But thinking about that, especially in a longevity perspective of, okay, if I release anything else, then how does this sit along this? How do they sit together? How do they sit alongside each other? That's really, really important things to think about at the beginning. You're not going to have all the answers. I mean, we've never had any answers at all. We're just like 5 people kind of trying to make it happen. And but you get better. And you start to understand your audience. You understand the product better. You understand what people start to respond to, what they don't respond to, what you get support complaints about. That's an excellent, excellent test of documentation.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Yes, one more question.
So my question's a little bit left of field, and it's referring to the job that you had as an explainer at the Science Museum in London.
Yeah.
So to what extent were you expected to know everything? Because I'm kind of asking from like the opposite point of view from when I was a kid, and I did something like that too, my GP. But yeah, I was writing a comic book when I was 10 years old, and I was asking him all sorts of questions like, what happens if you get stabbed in the hand, or how do you recover from suffocation, and what happens when you're in a spaceship that leaves the stratosphere? So,
oh my God!
Like, what happens if you didn't know the answer to something?
When 10-year-olds are involved, you're expected to know absolutely everything from every domain of human knowledge ever uncovered, explored, or extrapolated. And often, like, if a kid asked me something and I didn't know, and this still goes for Bela stuff, and I don't know, you never, ever, ever lie. And there's always, let's find out. And that has always, that I think has been a really important thing in like understanding like user bases, is you can't lie to people. You should never, ever lie to people. They'll know and you look dumb. But it doesn't mean I always have the answers. And so there is the spirit of let's find out has, I think, been really, really useful. I want to read that comic book. Anyone else want to read that comic book? Sounds amazing.
If there are no more questions, Astrid, could we go to the next slide?
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much to a big hand for Rachel and Fabian for this amazing event.
Thank you to both of our speakers, to Astrid and Timur. And I know there's not only a lot more to come tonight, there's still pizza, chances to actually talk to each other. The pizza just arrived, great. And we know we cut off all of your conversations by achieving that 7-minute milestone. But I also want to invite you, we already have our next meetup planned. We have Daniel Mack, who's going to be talking about network audio. We will still be here for the next meetup, but we will be looking for a bigger space now that we know that so many people are interested. If any of you knows of a space or has access to a space, come see me and Fabian. And if any of you is interested in giving a talk at one of our future meetups, please also come and see one of us. Have I forgotten anything? Oh yes, I'll thank you to our sponsors, Holoplot, for providing the space and the pizzas, and also Ableton. So as was mentioned before, the pizza is downstairs on the